So last Friday, the WEC announced that they will leave the GTE formula in 2024 in favor of a GT3 based one. Their goal in this being lowering costs and raising OEM support. And that got me thinking, what's really the difference between GTE and GT3? And they sound quite similar. And why is WEC making the switch? So in this video, I'll take a chance to give a rundown on the differences between GTE and GT3. So, starting off with the statistical differences. Similarly to the transition from LMP1s to hypercars, the cars are going to be slower. GT3 cars have about 10 less horsepower and way less downforce, both underbody and overbody. The wings are bigger on a GTE car, and there's a lot more underbody downforce on a GTE car. The difference is quite large, actually, between, in terms of time gaps. If you really want a good direct comparison, you'd find it in IMSA, because right now they have both a GTE and GT3 category in the forms of GT Le Mans and GT Daytona, respectively. Now, next year they'll be dropping that and switching to entirely GT Daytona, but I'm going off this year. So, at this year's 6 Hours of the Glen, the most recent example I can find, and the most recent example that I could find on a decently long track. GTLM, which is GTE, the pole time was a 140.944. In GT Daytona, the pole time was a 145.539. That's a 4.6 second gap. And just extrapolating this out over a lap at Le Mans, you get a super rough estimate of about 10 seconds a lap at Le Mans. And again, similar to the hypercar formula, the goal isn't to have the fastest cars. The goal is to have fast cars with a cost balance, so the costs don't go out of control. That was what was happening in LMP1, and it's happening in GTE right now. The WEC's goal was to have more cars and more big manufacturers in their top GT class, and they'll find that in GT3. I'll use IMSA as a comparison again here. In this year's 24 Hours of Daytona, the GT Le Mans class had 6 total entries across 4 manufacturers, those being the 2 Corvettes, the Risi Ferrari, the WeatherTech Porsche, and the 2 factory BMWs. And recently, BMW's GTE appearances have been patchy at best. They've been running the endurance races in IMSA, and that's really it. They didn't do Le Mans this year. They haven't been doing the sprint races in IMSA. I wouldn't expect any big GTE program for the future for BMW. And even with BMW, there's only 5 GTE models that actually compete worldwide, those being Corvette, Porsche, Ferrari, BMW, and Aston Martin. As for GTD, in the 24 Hours of Daytona, they had 19 entries across 9 manufacturers, those being Lamborghini, Porsche, Lexus, Ferrari, Aston Martin, Mercedes, Acura, Audi, and BMW. Now, in no way am I suggesting that all 9 of those manufacturers would have an interest in running Le Mans, but 3 of them already are, and you could make a good case for others making an attempt at Le Mans if they'd have a homologated car. So, you'd also probably end up having a few privateer teams too, maybe just buying off one of the chassis from someone, or possibly making their own, probably not, but maybe. Put simply, GT3 is slower, but with lower costs and way more OEMs. So really, to sum it all up here, you've got GTE is much faster, but is losing OEM support quite quickly, and by the time we get to 2024, we'll likely be quite close to being dead. Looking at the GT3 class, you've got a class that is slower, but is likely to significantly increase OEM support in Le Mans, and is a big class that seems to be pretty steadily at the amount of cars they have, and has quite a wide range of usage across the world. So all types of privateer teams would have GT3 cars compared to mostly just a couple of OEMs having GTE spec cars. My best guess is that a prospective GT3 Pro class would be quite large and full of the world's top manufacturers. And that's not even factoring GT3 AM's growth, because put simply, GT3, again, is a huge category that's got a big worldwide appeal and is used all over the world. You could quite easily see more people entering Le Mans in the GT3 AM class simply because there's more cars out there that fit those regulations. It's only likely that it could expand the GT classes far past what they're at right now. And even GTE AM is quite big right now. They had 23 entries at this year's race, so it would only get bigger. And it's quite interesting to think about that, just how big a GT3 AM class would be. Even a GT3 Pro class, you could reasonably see having 15 or 20 cars. It's really, in my opinion, it's only a good decision from the WEC. I can't see anything major going wrong with this. I think that it's going to increase grid sizes quite a bit. My only real concern is that you could have too many people trying to enter in GT classes, which might end up forcing privateers out. Now, I'm going to deviate from the course here and do a bit of math just to kind of prove my point. Here's my logic, and you can agree or disagree. Hypercar has about 20 confirmed entries and 2 or 3 more OEMs that are almost confirmed and a few more looking at it. So for simplicity's sake, I'll say 25-ish entries. And another 20 or so for GT3. That might be a bit big. That might be a bit big for a GT3 Pro class, but I'll say 20. That puts you at 45. And this year, there were about 25 LMP2 entries and about 25 GTE AM entries. With a Garage 56 entry and 4 reserve entries, that's another 5. And forgive me if my logic is wrong here, because that's 100 entries. Now, at some point, someone's going to get forced out, especially when you start talking about, I mean, you could see more people coming in, just classes continuing to grow. You could feasibly see a 115-car entry list at Le Mans, and obviously not everyone's going to make the cut in that. So you could start seeing privateer teams forced out of 24 Hours of Le Mans appearances in favor of hypercars and GT3 Pro cars, with a bit of just oversaturation of the top OEM classes. But it's just an interesting thing for the WEC to try to balance, because they're really trying to grow all their categories, but at least at Le Mans, you only have a certain amount of space that you can use. I mean, this year, everyone that entered in GTE Pro and Hypercar got let in the race because the categories were small. But if you get to a point in 2023, 2024 where there's 25 entries in Hypercar and 20 entries in GT3 Pro, either you're going to have to let all those guys in, or you're going to have to take some of them out and let some privateer teams come in the P2 class and the GT3 AM class. It'll be interesting for the WEC to try to balance that. Now, we're going up from 63 or 62 garages to 70 within the next couple of years. By the time we get to 2023, there'll be 70 garages, because the ACO is actually planning to expand the garages that they have right now, because that was kind of an unfinished project. They were actually planning to work with that in 2020, and then COVID happened and that project got delayed. That'll probably be done within the next year or two, and by 2023 you should have 70 garages at Le Mans, which means 70 possible entries. And at some point, with 115 cars on the entry list, you're going to have to take out some privateer teams, and that, it kind of sucks. But the question is just, how does the WEC want to handle their increasing hypercar interest and a possible high GT3 interest as well? Because, I mean, just think about how many people we've got in hypercar right now. As of right now, I had said there's about 20 confirmed entries, with Cadillac announcing their entry. There's tons of others that are still looking at it. I mean, you've got, I mean, there's just tons. I'd have to put up a list here in a minute, but like, it's possible that you could have, just like I had said, 25, possibly 30 hypercars, and at some point they're going to have to start taking people out. But otherwise, a switch to GT3 just seems right. And if you still prefer GTE, we still have 2 and a bit more years of that. But in my opinion, it really seems like it'll give a much needed boost to the GT class. So that's my new Racing Explainer series. If you guys enjoyed the video and want to see more like it, hit the like button. And as for the future, I've got a new This Week's Racing News coming out tomorrow. So that's about all for this video. I'll see you guys all later.